Hello, Tim here, and welcome to another watercolor demonstration, this time focusing on shadows, trying to make them interesting, trying to get the values right of shadows, trying to inject some color, some interest into those shadows, the angle of the shadows as well, trying to get in some quirky little angles and some good angles. And also edges, a mixture of soft edges and hard edges, which is always a good idea in watercolor. So this is the subject of my painting. This is Fivizzano, a pretty little village in Tuscany, but it could be anywhere. We're sort of looking against the light. This is mid-afternoon sun. And we've got some really interesting shadows here. So for example, look at the angle on these shadows, almost like a 45-degree angle, which in my opinion, shadows with 45-degree angles, they always add a little bit of impact and drama to the scene. And this sort of strong shadow here, but then look at this edge, it's all soft. All right, these edges over here hard, and then think about the colors, the warmth of colors. So over here, generally speaking, they're warm colors. They're sort of yellowy, orangey colors, but down here, certainly bluish in color, cooler colors. Also think about the composition. So we've got some nice cars here, just creeping into the shadows, a row of parked cars on the right hand side, again throwing some nice shadows over the pavement. I'll probably not have this car here right in the middle. I'll just concentrate really on this lovely sort of Italian looking car, this Fiat car here, and those cars on the right hand side. And then over on the pavement, the sidewalk here, there's a sort of planter. I'm going to put in a figure here, again, maybe sort of partly in the shadows, but maybe walking towards us. Lovely buildings with nice rooftops to them, again providing some harder edges against the sky. And over on the left-hand side, this building here, providing a nice sort of left-hand frame, left-hand sort of border, framing that left-hand side. I've got to think about perspective, these lines here, so I need to think about getting the initial drawing right. A little bit easier on the right-hand side with the perspective, and then the street level going up like that. There's too many red lines appearing. Yeah, a nice scene, a nice subject for watercolor, lots of different values. Thinking about focal point, but concentrate on this video, creating some atmosphere with shadows, going quite bold, nice and loose, and as I say, think about the colors, the values of those shadows. So dark against light, or light against dark, is going to make the darks a little bit darker around a white area. The color in those shadows, and also the edges, mixture of hard and soft edges. So let's see how we get on. So I'm going to be doing this painting in 4 stages. First step is the drawing, getting in the main shapes of the buildings, the cars, my figure, getting the perspective right. So making sure the drawing is correct first before I then go on to the second stage, which is the wash, really laying down the base colours of the painting, covering up pretty much all of the paper with those base colours. And then stage 3, and this is the important thing for this video, the shadows, getting the drama right, the edges, the colours, the values right with those shadows. And then lastly, just a little bit of tidying up and adding in a few details with a smaller brush to finish up the painting. So step 1, getting in the initial drawing with using here a soft pencil, 3B pencil. So I've got in my left-hand border, left-hand side of the painting with that building, and in the middle we've got in the background, we've got the main building and then a slightly lower building up to the top right-hand corner. Now this lovely little Italian car parked up on the roadside there, and then just a sort of indication of where the shadows are going to be. Now the cars on the right hand side, we've got these 3 cars, and as they come up towards the right hand side, I'm going to see less of the right hand edge, so I need to adjust that sort of angle there for those. So that's the middle car, and then the left hand car. So group of 3 cars on the left hand side. Now, sorry, on the right side. Now on the left hand side, figure just coming into the shadows, walking towards us, an indication of where the face is going to be. I just sort of cross-hatch that face. And I'm going to just emphasize some of the lines again, just so that I'm going to be able to see those lines from after doing the wash. It's not going to obliterate those lines. Get the perspective right with on the left hand side this building and the street level. Then we've got the sides of the pavement. Car, maybe something going on in the distance. And then a bit more detail on that top building. Make some of these lines just a bit more stronger so I can see what I'm doing after the wash stage. And that's where some of the shadows are going to be. Don't often draw in all of the shadow edges, but as is the shadows are a key part of this painting, I want to make sure that's absolutely right. So now down to the wash stage. So the drawing's done. I'm happy with the drawing, and start off with the wash. And first step here is to get in the sky. So I'm using a big mop brush, a softer mop brush as I have, and getting that sky going over the edge of the buildings. And there is a little bit of sky creeping down on the left-hand side of that far building. And while that's still moist, I'm now going to be putting in the underlying wash for the buildings, which is this sort of warmer colour. So same brush, and maybe slightly thicker paint here, not as much water. If you think about the ratio of water to paint, not as much as I have with the sky. And starting from the left-hand side, going over to the buildings in the background, just paint around the figure as best I can, and then the building in the background. most of which will be in the shade. So I'm constantly mixing up different colours here so that it's not too, that there's a bit of variety going on with these colours. And with watercolour you've got to go a little bit bolder than you think, because the colours are going to dry a lot lighter. Now, depending on how humid your room is where you're painting, this is going to dry, it could dry quite quickly. So I'm having to work quite fast over this area to make sure that there's no edges between these different colours I'm putting down. Paint around the tops of the cars. Building on the right hand side is a slightly different colour. And things really are going to look a total mess before they, before hopefully I try and pull it back. Little gap between that car. Nice edge over the top of the roof of the right-hand car, and then down to the street level. So over on the left-hand side that might have dried a bit, so it doesn't really matter because I'm going to go over that again with the darker shadows. But I've got to keep working quite quickly just so I don't get too many nasty edges between paint that's dried and then going in with the wash on top. Now the road surface, a bit like the buildings, I'm using brush strokes in different directions just to get in a little bit of a texture to the road surface, and a tiny bit darker in the bottom right corner. We are looking sort of against the light, so the lighter part of the road will be in the distance and then coming a little bit darker over to the right. I'm using Saunders Waterford paper, and this is cold press, the texture, and it's cotton-based paper, so it soaks in quite well. It's going to stay moist for a longer time than paper-based, wood-based watercolor paper. So I've got a longer time to work with different areas of the painting. But I've got to let this wash dry completely before I go on to the next stage, which will be the darks. And that's really where, with these shadows, that's the main focus of the painting, are these interesting shadows. And that's where I'm going to be adding in a bit more depth and values to the painting. Going to be using a slightly smaller mop brush now, and this is a squirrel mop brush, so it's a natural brush. What I was using before was a synthetic brush. The first stage was a Raphael soft aqua brush, but I find using a natural one just gives you sometimes, as long as it's it's got to have a good edge and a good point to it, and then holding it as I do now closer to the business end of the brush, just get some nice brush marks appearing. And it doesn't matter, there you can see the brush is sort of bent at an angle. It doesn't really matter, it just gives you more interesting shapes of the brush. So there's not too much water on the brush at this stage. Bit of detail of the window, doorway on the left-hand side, some sort of shutter or something like that. I should really go through the colours I've got on my palette. Top right, going from the top right, I've got neutral tint, then coming down, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, cobalt green, viridian green, cobalt blue, sort of in the middle there, ultramarine blue, then alizarin crimson, a Windsor red, light red, and then two up from the bottom is orange, cadmium orange, and then a lemon yellow. So that's alizarin crimson. I was mixing up there. So with these shadows, I've got to keep changing the colour combination so that it does look a little bit more interesting. Now I'm getting in a nice hard edge against the sky on the rooftop of this building. Doesn't need to be a perfect edge. In fact, the more broken that edge is, the better it can, the more natural it could look. As I come down, I'm going a little bit weaker with the colours, so I've mixed in a bit more water. I've just dabbed on a little bit of paint just to check the right value before committing to painting the rest of that area. So just a little dab, check the value, and then if it's okay, continue on down. Doesn't matter if I leave out little bits of paper. Sometimes they can add to the charm of a watercolour, these little bits that you leave, and they could also be made into something, maybe the light catching the top of a post or the top of a window ledge, or if it's at street level, it could be the top of a figure, for example. Even something that I haven't actually contemplated it at the start. You know, I haven't actually drawn it in, but just accidentally, some little part of the painting is left, and it could be on reflection. It could be made into something. As regards the mixing wells on the right hand side, generally speaking, in the middle one I'll have the cools in there, and then in the bottom right are my warmer mixes, so the reds, the oranges and so on. And then right at the top, just where I was dipping into some neutral tint, that will be the darks over there. Now I have to be a bit careful painting around that figure and the cars again to keep that sharp edge. These shadows on the far building now, they're going to be quite warm, so that's why I mixed in quite a bit of red and orange in there. And just keep in mind, so I can just about see my original drawing marks, and what I think looks quite nice is that sort of 45-degree angle, do you see? Which I'll have a few of these 45-degree lines in the scene, sort of hopefully in parallel with each other. And I think that looks quite nice in a watercolour, a nice sort of fresh look to it. Quite dark down towards the street level, so in this one I've gone quite dark at the top of the building and then slightly lighter in the middle before I come darker down towards the base. Top right corner, go a bit cooler, a bit darker. And this brush is giving me some nice marks. Tilt the brush just so that I can tilt it 180 so I've got the colour on the other side. Nothing too precise, but trying to be as confident as I can with those marks and getting them straight, getting them parallel. Back to the left hand side, so almost at sort of shoulder height, a darker bit there before I come cooler on the street level. So I'm mixing quite a bit of cobalt, which I think is quite a nice colour. So where I've got a figure sitting on top of a shadow, I normally do the shadow first and then drop the figure into it. If you see what I mean. Well, you'll see in a minute. So going in with the shadow first of all. Nice and cool. Now with this fairly rough paper, where the shadow becomes softer, well, there's two approaches to this. I could have pre-wet the paper. The paper could have been damp, and then as I go over it with a thicker consistency of paint, I'm going to get that soft edge. So that would be one approach for doing that. The other approach with soft paper is with the brush at a fairly flat angle, just quickly dragging it and maybe increasing that speed as I was coming up to the edge of the paper, just so that I get that sort of bit of a deckled edge, a bit of a rough edge to that shadow, which is another technique you can use. I'll imagine there's a bit of sunlight hitting the windscreen of this Fiat. Now the car's on the right hand side, thinking about where the sunlight's coming from. So I've got a fairly lightish colour to the cars, bit of light hitting the left-hand side. Come down towards the bottom of the car and leave a little bit of paint. There's a slight slope on, with my paper, the board I'm using, and the paint is going to come a little bit down towards the bottom of that car, which when I go in with the shadows, the darker shadows are going to go up. They're going to go up and meet it, and I'm going to have another soft edge. So here's the shadows: neutral tint, ultramarine blue, and a bit of alizarin crimson. There you are, it's going uphill into the car. Continue on to the second car. Perhaps we can see just a little bit of light underneath the body of the car, little sort of slither of light, and then this final one. Quite thick the paint. Continue over to the right hand side. Right, smaller brush now for the figure, starting off with the face and arms. And then the body, sort of a bit like a light blue. Quite watery, the brush, not too thick, and drop it into the shadows. The shadows are still quite moist, they haven't dried yet, so I can have that one merging into the other. Now connect up the right hand side of the figure with the car. So I'm really now into stage 4, the details. So we've done the shadows, quite happy with those, and the shadows are drying quite nicely. They're still a little bit damp in places, so I need to be a bit careful with how much moisture is on this brush. So fairly dry, and well, I can see as soon as I dip it on the paper, I can see whether it's spreading, or I can just detect how much moisture there is on that brush. I am, as I'm going through painting, as I'm constantly looking at my reference photo and just checking things. So I added a bit more detail to that car windscreen. Perhaps we can see a little bit of the steering wheel, for example. Just where I'm not so sure, I'll go back to that reference photo. But on the whole, I'm as I get towards the end of the painting, I'm probably looking at the photograph less and less, and just really thinking about trying to create something that's fairly artistic, rather than copying the photograph. Tiny bit of shadow underneath the edge of the roof. there's a sort of balcony there and another one there. This brush is just an ordinary synthetic round brush. It could be anything, but I think because it's synthetic, it's quite springy and got a bit of life in it, whereas the natural mop brush I was using before for the shadows, that's probably got no life in it at all. And it's not springy at all. It's just very, very soft. Just really going around the painting now, just picking up extra bits of detail. Of course, the trick is knowing when to stop. You don't want to overdo this detail stage and get to a painting that's too overworked. So I am trying to be conscious of not overdoing things. For example, the balcony railings there, not putting in every vertical rail, just a few of them to give the impression of the railings. Add some details on the cars. Some back bumpers and a little bit of extra value to the edges of the windscreens. That's the edge of the pavement. Under the car. Pick up a bit of red for the brake lights on the back of the cars. I've introduced a little bit of a curve to that line. I think that's quite nice as a sort of border, so it's not too vertical, just a bit of a quirky angle to that drain pipe coming down. And as I normally do in a street scene, a few tire marks with a dry brush, just to add in a bit more interest to the road surface. This area on the left hand side just needs a bit more detail to it. But it is in the bottom left hand corner, so I've got to be fairly careful that I don't draw too much attention to that bottom left corner here, but just to add in a bit more texture to the pavement and the road. Use my finger where necessary just to smudge things out, or I sometimes use a finger just to lift off a little bit of paint or create a soft edge. So I end up with a lot of dirty fingertips at the end of a painting. Figure. Bit more colour to the legs. Rooftops. I think that building just needed a bold vertical line. Really, any painting needs some strong verticals and strong horizontals. A few lines just to help the perspective a little bit. As you can see, there's not much water on the brush now. They're all pretty much dry brush marks. Very little water. I think when my brush is moving that slow, it's almost time to complete the painting. You just know when to finish. So this is the end painting. Fivizzano, thinking about shadows, trying to make them interesting, lots of different edges, lots of different colours, different values. So, for example, as regards edges, we've got some hard edges up in the top right corner. We've got a soft edge coming towards us where the sunlight coming from the left, so it's going to be, those shadows are going to get softer coming over to the right-hand side. Different temperatures of shadows as well, so nice and warm under that background building, but keeping it cool over on the left-hand side here, top right corner. Different temperatures of shadows, and then different values of shadows. So fairly light down here, maybe where the light is bouncing off the right-hand side of the street, coming in here, providing a bit more light, but nice and dark down towards the bottom of the buildings and the top of the building. So hopefully you like that little video, watercolour demonstration, shadows of Fivizzano in Tuscany. More up on my website, more pictures up on my website, timwilmot.com. Catch up with you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.